Hi, it's Katrina. El Dorado. The Spanish lust for gold in the beginning of the 16th century gave birth to the legend of El Dorado. Europeans believed that somewhere in South America, hiding in the jungle of the New World, was a place of immense riches and incalculable wealth. According to Jim Griffith, expert folklorist from Tucson, Arizona, El Dorado shifted its location geographically over the years, as Europeans could never agree on where it was. And eventually, El Dorado just became the name of a lost city somewhere in the Americas that nobody has ever found. Interestingly, the origins lie deep in South America at a very real place. When Spanish explorers arrived in the 16th century, they met a tribe of natives living high up in the Andes Mountains of Colombia. When a new chieftain in the tribe took the throne, there was a ceremony at Lake Guatavita, located not far from Bogotá. This lake is still there, and it's a major tourist attraction for people who want to see the source of the El Dorado myth. Accounts from the 16th century claim that during the ceremony, the new chieftain was covered completely in gold dust, and gold treasure and precious jewels were thrown into the lake to appease the mysterious god that lived deep underwater. The Spaniards called the golden chief El Dorado, which translates to the gilded one. The legend of this chief continued to grow until eventually El Dorado was no longer a person, but a mythical place in the jungle. In reality, the entire myth started just because of a lake supposedly filled with gold. This was so tempting that in 1545, the Spaniards tried to drain the lake. They did end up finding hundreds of pieces of gold all along the edge, but were never able to drain the water enough to obtain all the treasures in the deepest parts of the lake. A god was born. On the ancient island of Crete in Greece, there is a place called Dictyon Cave. It's high up in the mountains, nearly impossible to reach, and is said to be the birthplace of a god. It was inside of Dictyon Cave where Zeus, the great lord of Olympus and the wielder of thunderbolts, was born. Thousands of years ago, the legendary birthplace of Zeus was so popular among the ancient Cretans at the time that a cult sprouted up around the mountains. Pilgrims journeyed to the cave to give worship, and it became one of the most important and sacred religious sites in Greece. The cave is located roughly 3,360 feet on top of the northern side of Mount Dicta. There is a steep set of stairs which lead down the side of the mountain to the lower cave known as Katos Pileo. On the right-hand side lies a massive hall. Some small stone basins in the hall fill with naturally dripping water, and Zeus himself is supposedly said to have drank from them. There is a small lake surrounded by stalagmites and stalactites along the stairwell, and at the back of the hall behind the lake, there lies an even smaller chamber. It was in this small chamber where Zeus was said to be born. King Arthur's birthplace. Archaeologists at the ancient site of Tintagel in the United Kingdom believe they may have just discovered the birthplace of King Arthur. Unlike the birthplace of Zeus, this may have actually been the place where the man behind the legend was brought into the world. Because whereas Zeus may never have actually existed, King Arthur could have. The Tintagel Peninsula in Cornwall was once home to a palace in the Dark Ages. Much of that palace has been destroyed, along with the buildings and other fortifications that had been on the peninsula. And for decades, archaeologists have been busy excavating every last inch, trying to find evidence of the society that lived here. Just recently, archaeologists have made major headway by using ground-penetrating radar. They discovered dozens of structures, including the palace, many of which were probably built in the 6th century, about 1,400 years ago. Many of these structures house soldiers, artists, and ordinary workers. But whoever lived in the main structure was living a rather glamorous lifestyle. Researchers found evidence of wine imported from Turkey and olive oil from Tunisia and the Greek Isles. They may have also used fancy painted glass cups and plates originating all the way from North Africa. Historian Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote an extensive history of the kings of Britain around the year 1138. In his book, he described King Arthur as being born in Tintagel. And if what the historian said is true, King Arthur would have likely been born inside the most glamorous building, which would be the one with the evidence of a lavish lifestyle. And so, by putting all these pieces together, it looks like this ruined structure could just be where King Arthur actually came from. The gateway to hell. Mount Hekla stands a staggering 4,891 feet tall. It's a stratovolcano in Iceland that occasionally spits out fiery lava, toxic gas, and lava bombs that weigh about 12 tons each. It's one of the scariest places in the world and has erupted throughout history several times. One of these eruptions was in 1104 AD. After the volcano erupted with all its fire and fury, local Icelanders began to believe it was the actual gateway to hell. And ever since then, Mount Hekla has had a prominent place in Icelandic mythology. One of the earliest mentions of the mountain was shortly after its last big eruption in the 12th century. Monk Benedict described the voyages of Saint Brendan in a long poem, and in the poem he referred to Hekla as the eternal prison of the betrayer of Jesus, Judas. In the 16th century, the great German writer Caspar Pusser claimed the gates of hell were located inside the bottomless abyss of the Hekla volcano. It was such a spooky place for Icelanders that they thought birds flying near the volcano were lost souls. They even believed witches flocked to the base of the volcano on Easter to perform satanic rituals. Big shout out to HT and William Thaxton III for supporting this channel. Thanks so much for letting us be a part of your day. Hope it's a good one, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. Tamoanchan. Tamoanchan is a mythological place from the cultures of Mesoamerica, including the Aztecs and the Mayans. The indigenous people of ancient Mexico believed that when a person died, they went to Tamoanchan, which also happened to be the home of the gods. It was described by the Mexican Jesuit Jovan de Tovar as the Aztec equivalent to the Christian Garden of Eden. But here's the thing about Tamoanchan. Unlike the Christian idea of heaven way up in the sky and out of reach, Tamoanchan was a physical place on earth. It was said to be at the top of a mountain, kind of like how Shambhala was supposedly hidden in the snow of the Himalayas. But this land was so high up that no mortal could climb the mountain. The only way to reach it was to first journey through the underworld, kind of like Dante's pilgrimage through hell and up to paradise. And so we have to ask, was Tamoanchan an unattainable myth, or was it really located somewhere in Mexico? According to researcher Alfredo Lopez Austin, Tamoanchan was almost definitely located near Cuernavaca in the state of Morelos. It was far enough away from the capital of Mexico City to feel like a place of myth, with its own climate and a lot of different vegetation. Compared to Mexico City, Cuernavaca was a lush and abundant paradise. 2,000 years ago, it could very well have felt like a place of the gods. Delphi. Delphi in Greece is a sanctuary that was once considered to be the navel of the world. It's just a few hours from Athens today, but to the people of the ancient city, it would have felt like a whole world away. The only way to reach Delphi in ancient times would have been by journeying up and over the mountains, through incredibly harsh terrain, only to arrive at a mysterious stone altar on the side of an imposing cliff. It definitely would have felt like a mythical place, a lush natural landscape between two gigantic mountains. Delphi was also one of the most important mystical places for the Greeks. It was home to the Oracle of Delphi, who was even consulted by the Lydian king Croesus before he attacked the Persian Empire. The oracle told the king that if he went to war, he would destroy a great kingdom. Croesus was pleased with this answer, but it turned out to be his own kingdom that was obliterated. There wasn't a single major decision made without consulting the Oracle of Delphi. These days, there are still mythical buildings standing here. There is the Sanctuary of Athena, the Temple of Apollo, and the very platform where the oracle would give her visions of the future. And finally, there's the giant stone which Zeus supposedly put down to mark Delphi as the center of the world. Shambhala. Shambhala translates from ancient Tibetan as source of happiness. This place is said to be a mythical kingdom hidden somewhere in the snowy peaks of the Himalayas. The kingdom is mentioned in multiple Buddhist texts, including the Kalachakra Tantra. In Tibetan religious teachings, Shambhala is a major player in the mythology of the future. It's said that from this kingdom of Shambhala, there will come a great and unprecedented army, which will cleanse the world and restore the earth. For some believers, Shambhala is a real place, with some kind of ghostly army preparing to sweep across the world and save it from destruction. Other followers believe Shambhala is more of a spiritual place than a physical one. and yet different followers from various regions all have their own ideas. For example, the Tibetan Buddhists of Western Tibet believe Shambhala is hiding inside the Sutlej Valley, while Mongolian Buddhists think Shambhala is in the valleys of southern Siberia. Some historians even suggest that Shambhala was once the capital of a lost civilization, where peace and prosperity ruled supreme. The mythical castle of Iraq. Deep in the mountains of Iraq, archaeologists in 2022 came across an ancient fortress, which they say was once part of the lost Parthian city of Natunia. This is a remarkable discovery because the existence of the city has only been known to historians because its name was found on some ancient coins. Teams from both Germany and Iraq began investigating the ruins 13 years ago, conducting surveys and excavations in the Zagros Mountains. They used drone technology and boots on the ground to uncover the secrets of the site, but only now have they fully identified the actual castle, and it's nothing short of fantastic. According to the lead researcher Michael Braun from Heidelberg University in Germany, this castle is a real-life Helm's Deep. If you don't know what Helm's Deep is, it's a gigantic fortification set into the side of a mountain in The Lord of the Rings. This is literally a fantasy castle, a monumental fort built of stone in the Iraqi highlands. It was built in a kind of groove inside the mountains, with its huge towers and strong walls filling in the gap between craggy cliffs. It was easily defended because of the terrain and practically impenetrable. Archaeologists have found buildings that served as barracks, other military structures, and even a Zoroastrian sanctuary, which was likely used to worship the ancient Iranian water goddess Anahita. The fortress is about 2,000 years old and really looks like something straight out of a fairy tale. The Temple Church. The Temple Church is a mythical place you can visit right now in London, England. The church is hidden just beyond a gateway on Fleet Street, and its history goes back to the days of the Knights Templar. It's actually sitting within a district called the Temple, which is Britain's main legal district and the center of English law. The way to get there is by getting off the subway at Temple Station. Clearly, there's a history here involving the word temple, and it goes back to the Templars. The original church was built by the Knights Templar and was their mythical English headquarters. Thanks to well-kept historical records, we know the church was consecrated on February 10, 1185, by Patriarch Heraclius of Jerusalem, at the time of King Henry II's reign over England, who was also in attendance at this consecration. While the Temple Church may not be quite as exciting as the lost castle of King Arthur, it was a very real stronghold used by one of the only legitimate mystical orders of knights that has ever existed in Europe. The Templars used the headquarters as their royal treasury, but it was also a lot more than that. In the 12th century, there was a church, residences for the knights, a military training facility, and recreational grounds where the Templars could hang out and relax. There was even a special place for the novices to spend their time, since they were forbidden to go into the larger city without the permission of the temple master. The only piece of their ancient fortification left is the church, and even that was blown to bits in World War II by the Germans. But it has been rebuilt, and it's still standing today. The Hill of Tara. The Hill of Tara is the most mythical place in all of Ireland and is often compared to the pyramids in Egypt or Stonehenge in England. It was once the greatest seat of power on the island. Historians believe there were at least 142 kings that sat on the throne and reigned at the Hill of Tara, and that the lineages of these kings may even reach back to prehistoric times. That would mean that the Hill of Tara has been used for potentially over 5,000 years. The hill was not only once the site of a great fortification ruled by kings, but it's also considered a sacred place where gods lived. And through the years, it's been seen as the entrance to the other world, a place where spirits can enter the land of the living. In fact, the Hill of Tara is even directly connected to Saint Patrick, who supposedly came to the site in 433 AD to confront the pagans at a time when Ireland was converting to Christianity. So, what makes this place so special? In truth, it's the hill itself. The name Tara translates to place of great prospect, and a quick journey here really proves the point. On a clear day, you can see nearly half the counties of Ireland from the top of the hill. This would have made it immensely strategic in ancient times, and the perfect place for the king to look out over all of Ireland from his window.
Alamut Castle. Alamut Castle is the very real home of the actual Assassin's Creed. To understand this great fortification high up in the mountains, we need to talk about the Nizari Ismaili. These people were followers of Nizarism mixed with Ismailism, and they went up in the mountains where they formed their own unique branch of Shia Islam. It became known as the Alamut State, founded around the year 1050 by Hassan-i-Sabah. He was also the creator of a unique military group called the Hashashin. The word actually translates roughly to smokers of hashish, and some scholars believe it's the original form of the word assassin. Get it? Hashashin, assassin? Kind of close. Whatever the case, these militants carried out missions involving espionage and assassination. They executed at least 3 major caliphs, one ruler of Jerusalem, multiple Muslim and Christian leaders, and who knows how many others. They had their home base at Alamut Castle. It was originally built by the ruler of Daylam in 865 AD, after he saw an eagle perched on a rock there during a hunting trip. He took it as a sign, and so commissioned the castle. Today, it's nothing but ruins in the snowy mountains of Iran, but still stands as one of the most isolated and mystical fortresses ever built. Sadly, the Mongolian invasion in the 13th century saw the collapse of the entire region. The Mongols reached Alamut Castle in 1256, and even the legendary assassins were forced to surrender. The gates to Anwen. In Welsh folklore, Anwen is the other world. The name itself translates to very deep place, and it by no means should be confused with the Christian version of hell. The world of Anwen is said to be a place of beauty and splendid nature, with its own castles and kings. More like heaven. The land is ruled by Iran, and it is a place of eternal youth, no illness, and no death, and with nothing but pleasure. Basically a paradise under the ground. The other world is mentioned in multiple mythological tales from medieval Wales. It can also be found mentioned in Irish myth. It's either an island or somewhere underground. While it almost certainly doesn't exist and is nothing but fantasy, there are places in Wales where one is said to be able to reach this mystical land. One of them is called Finon. It's a secluded waterfall in the valley of the River Sich that supposedly hides a secret entrance to Annwn. Then there is Glaslyn, a beautiful lake in Snowdonia National Park where King Arthur supposedly threw Excalibur. Legend says that Arthur's body was put in a boat, let loose on the lake, and his body was carried off to this heaven. In modern times, there is a legend that says if 2 people spend the night on the shores of the lake, one of them will awake a great poet, and the other will go insane. We also have a place called Grassholm. This is a tiny, uninhabited island off the coast of Pembrokeshire. All the way into the 19th century, the local people believed it was home to fairies, and that they sometimes disappeared under the sea so that nobody could actually find them. The severed head of Bran the Blessed, the legendary giant and king of Britain, is supposedly kept here, as is a secret gateway to Annwn. Okayama. Okayama in Japan is the birthplace of the great legend of Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto. In ancient times, the area of Okayama was called Kibi, and it's here that the legend has been passed down from generation to generation. It all has to do with a demon by the name of Ura, who resided in a great mountain castle on the very top of a craggy cliff. Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto was a local prince, and he waged war against the demon. The prince was ultimately victorious, and when he died, he was enshrined right next to where the head of the demon had been chopped off and buried. These days, it's said those who are brave enough can ask the head of the demon to tell them their fortune. Like many legendary places in Japan, all these locations are real. This city is real. Okayama has been standing for thousands of years. And there's the great Kibitsujinja Shrine, where the great hero is supposedly still at rest. There is even a special ritual that's done here, carried out at the shrine where the demon's head is buried, though it's extremely secretive. Visitors can't really participate, but if they are lucky, they can see the demon ritual from a distance. Would you be brave enough to ask the demon head to tell your fortune? Let me know in the comments below. Tir na Nog. Tir na Nog is the Irish version of the Welsh's Annwn, but with a legend of great drama and excitement. There was a warrior by the name of Oisin, son of the legendary leader Finn MacCool. Finn was the leader of Fianna, who guarded the High King of Ireland. One day, while Oisin was out exploring the green hills of Ireland, he came upon a beautiful white horse being ridden by the most beautiful young woman he had ever seen. She had hair the color of the sun and wore a dress of pale blue studded with stars. She said her name was Niamh and that her father was the ruler of a mystical land known only as Tir na Nog. She was there that day to take the great warrior Oisin back with her to the land of eternal youth. He agreed to go back and fell in love with the beautiful woman, but promised his people he would return to Ireland to see them again. On the back of her white horse, they galloped across the seas to the magical land. Together, the pair lived for 300 years in peace and happiness, but he eventually started to miss his family, and so Oisin took Niamh's magical horse and returned to Ireland. When he touched the soil, he aged 300 years immediately. That was when he learned that his father and all of their people had died long ago, but the legend of Fianna and the land of Tir na Nog still live on to this day. As for where this magical land may be located, nobody knows for sure. But Ireland has plenty of magical places. It's shout-out time! Big thank you to Dermina420 and Tony Hubbard for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. The Palace of King David. In the ancient Jewish text, King David was born a shepherd and grew to be a mighty king. He was the one who slayed the giant Philistine by the name of Goliath, raised an army, and ruled all of Israel. He is a mythical figure who may or may not have actually existed. One of the first things he did as king was capture the city of David in Jerusalem, fortify it against his enemies, and build himself a giant palace. And now, archaeologists believe they may have actually found that palace. According to archaeologists from Hebrew University, they discovered a large fortified complex near Jerusalem at a site named Khirbet Qeiyafa. It is now the best example of a fortified city from the days of King David, which means the king had more than likely used the site himself. The archaeologists discovered typical cultic objects that were used by the Judeans, who were the subjects of the great king. They also found no traces of pig remains, which makes sense seeing as pork was forbidden under Jewish law. Researchers are fairly certain that it was David who ruled from what is now a ruined palace, and his descendants after him. However, not everyone is convinced. Because the region has been the seat of many civilizations over time, the palace could have belonged to anyone. Archaeologist Israel Finkelstein says that the palace could have been built by the Philistines, the Canaanites, or anyone else since the 10th century BC. Hyperborea. The mysterious land of Hyperborea comes from Greek mythology. It's described in multiple tales as a land far to the north, way beyond the known world and extremely remote. The Greeks believed this place was so far north that it lay beyond the reach of the north wind. And according to them, there was a legendary race who lived in that land, people who worshipped the sun god Apollo. In reality, the legendary land of Hyperborea was most likely just anywhere north of the Black Sea. Archaeologists believe that because the Iron Age Celts living far to the north of Greece along the Danube did indeed trade with the Mediterranean, they were probably the inspiration for the Hyperborean people. The Greeks had no clue about just how frigid and cold and miserable the northern lands were, and so they turned them into a legendary place. When the Celts showed up to trade, to the Greeks they must have seemed like mysterious travelers from a faraway land. To them, the Celts were essentially aliens. Sierra de la Plata. In Inca legends, Sierra de la Plata is the Great Mountain of Silver. This legend spoke of a high and mighty city which was filled with an inconceivable quantity of silver. As you can imagine, Sierra de la Plata was of immense interest to the Spanish. After all, it was gold and silver that pushed the Spanish across the Americas, conquering all in sight. The Spanish defeated the Aztec and the Inca and gained more gold and silver than they knew what to do with. During their travels, the Spanish heard of fabled cities where the streets were lined with gold, and of the Great Mountain of Silver. Although the Spanish would eventually go on to discover the massive silver mines of Potosi in the year 1545, the Mountain of Silver eluded them. The silver mines were found near Bolivia, but the Mountain of Silver was supposedly somewhere hiding in the lush jungles of Brazil. The Potosi mines were also not owned by anyone when the Spanish showed up, while Sierra de la Plata was supposedly ruled over by a famous figure called the White King. We still don't know if Sierra de la Plata was a real place. It definitely could have been a powerful city hiding somewhere in the Amazon that the Spanish never found. Or it could have been a myth. There's just no way to know for sure. Like with the Colombian legends of El Dorado, this city could even be there today, reduced to a ruin and all the silver gone. The land of Hawaii. In the folklore of the Maori, the original inhabitants of New Zealand, they speak of a land called Hawaii. This should not in any way be confused with Hawaii, as it's not even close. The Maori people believed that before they reached their ultimate home of New Zealand around the year 1000, they came from a faraway mystical land called Hawaii. This is interesting because in reality, they most certainly came from a faraway land. We know that the Maori of New Zealand lived in China 15,000 years ago. The migration of the Polynesians is an incredible and fascinating story. People left China by boat, traveled to Taiwan, and over the next 15,000 years, slowly island hopped until they reached as far as Easter Island off the coast of Chile. Throughout those years, history and legend blended together. By the time these people migrated to the island of Fiji 3,500 years ago, they no longer knew where they had started. Their ancestors were thousands of years behind them, spread across different islands, already speaking other languages, and worshipping different gods. And by the time they reached Samoa 2,500 years ago, their origins were even more murky, so it's no surprise that the Maori had made up a place called Hawaii as their mythical homeland. Tintagel Castle. Tintagel Castle, or rather the ground upon which the castle stands, has been occupied since the Romans took over Britain over 2,000 years ago. It really began to flourish as a community in the 5th century, but in the 12th century, Tintagel became legendary across the world as the place where King Arthur was supposedly conceived. The legends of Tintagel and King Arthur captivated Richard, Earl of Cornwall, so much that he built the castle here in the 1230s. And to this very day, the castle still stands. From between the years 450 and 650, Tintagel was a small but prosperous town right on the coast that traded with the Mediterranean. The headland of Tintagel was dotted with small and simplistic houses, the remains of which can still be found today. Since it was right on the water, it was easy for ships to dock, trade their goods, and be on their way. This meant people from far inland would come here to participate in trade. What happened after the 7th century is a bit of a mystery. There doesn't appear to be any records, and this city seems to have been completely abandoned. 500 years later, Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote History of the Kings of Britain, in which he described the legendary ruler King Arthur. This text is the earliest mention of Tintagel and explains how Arthur was conceived in the city by Uther Pendragon, the king of Britain at the time, and his magical seduction of the beautiful Queen Igerna. We don't know how true this story is, nor if this part of Monmouth's supposed history is fantasy or fact. Either way, Tintagel is a mystical and very special place in Britain. Norumbega. Norumbega is an ancient mythical city in New England. Supposedly, this city was established by the Viking explorer Leif Erikson in the 11th century, near where Boston is today. Keep in mind that there is no archaeological evidence that this city ever existed. What we do have is a history of cartography. In the 16th century, just after Europeans discovered the Americas, maps began to appear with the name Norumbega on them. There are different spellings, but the city always seemed to be in New England. Then again, it wasn't always a city, but sometimes the name of a region, a river, or a landmark. This city was never found, if it ever existed at all. Historians think that if it did exist, it most likely stood where Bangor is now in Maine. Samuel de Champlain explored the region in 1605 looking for it, but found no trace of any civilization. Thanks for watching! What's your favorite mythical place? Diyarbakir. Archaeologists in Turkey recently discovered an ancient Roman temple steeped in mystery. The temple dates back 1,800 years and was likely used as a place of worship for the mysterious god Mithras, the deity of the Mithraism religion. The cult of Mithras may have been a sect of Zoroastrianism, and they worshipped Mithra, who was the defender of truth. The mystery behind Mithraism has never fully been solved. Some believe this ancient religion was the original Illuminati, a secret society that has its roots in some of the oldest civilizations in humanity. Some say Mithraism is still alive today and has been kept alive through secret organizations over the centuries, like the Knights Templar and the Masonic societies. If you ask historians and scholars, they will give you a completely different answer. Most of the experts believe Mithra was the Persian god of the sun, and that worship of him spread into the Roman Empire following the Roman battles against Persia. It's hard to say because even 2,000 years later, the details of the religion are vague at best. We know that any who wished to join had to go through a series of trials and allegedly had to endure 12 great torments, things like being physically and mentally tortured. When Christianity began to spread, the emperors in the Roman Empire banned the cult of Mithras, and so worshippers went underground. The mysterious temple was discovered in Turkey's Diyarbakir region, a place that has seen a lot over the years and holds many secrets. It's one of the most ancient regions in Turkey, filled with lost castles, the crumbling ruins of forgotten civilizations, and strange Roman temples dedicated to long-dead religions. The elite women of El Argar. Researchers with the Autonomous University of Barcelona recently announced that the ancient society of El Argar may have been ruled by elite women. It's a compelling mystery that could change the way we understand women in one of Europe's oldest cultures. The Argar flourished in the southeast of Spain on the Iberian Peninsula starting in 2200 BC. They lasted for over 700 years, only vanishing around 1550 BC. But it was in the last 2 centuries of their existence that they shifted from being a primitive society to being the first organized state in the western part of the Mediterranean. This was a huge deal and propelled El Argar to historic levels. They were one of the most advanced cultures in the world 4,000 years ago. The mystery scientists are trying to solve now is how they reached such great success. If the researchers from Barcelona are correct, it could have been because the whole society was ruled over by women instead of men. The theory of the female rulers comes because of burials. Archaeologists have dug up multiple tombs containing the bodies of both men and women. What they've been surprised about is that the women in these burials were clearly the more important of the pair. Archaeologists discovered heaps of precious objects and valuable materials, all belonging to the women. Some of the most impressive artifacts archaeologists have seen are silver diadems, feminine crowns positioned on the rotting skulls of women from El Argar. Each piece was created in a special silversmith workshop, and they've only ever been found on the skulls of elite women. Cristina Riuete, who took part in the study, says the diadems show that the women were obviously in the dominant ruling class. But whether El Argar prospered because of these innovative female leaders, or if it's all just a coincidence, we still don't know. Ancient Chinese pyramid. A team of archaeologists has just discovered the mysterious portrait of a king carved at the bottom of an ancient pyramid. This pyramid is miles away from where you might think it is. The discovery didn't take place in Egypt, but in northwest China. The king's face was found carved into the stone of the Shimao Chinese pyramid in Shanxi province. The pyramid is about 230 feet tall, roughly the same as the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was also built 4,200 years ago, at almost the exact same time. What a lot of people don't realize is that the Loess Plateau in China was the site of immense pyramid building around the year 2000 BC. At around the same time, the Giza Plateau experienced an explosion of pyramids being erected. So too did China. Shimao is considered the largest late Neolithic site in China, covering an astounding 988 acres. But this pyramid was used for totally different purposes than the pyramids at Giza. It wasn't a burial, and it had no use in religion. Instead, it was the base for a grandiose palace erected at the very top. The palace was bigger than 10 football fields, right at the top of the pyramid overlooking the great city. The palace was so immense, it even had a garden pool complete with pet crocodiles for the king. The mystery for archaeologists now is that nobody is really sure who ruled over the mysterious ancient city. We also don't know what happened to the civilization here, as they vanished without a trace 3,800 years ago. The newly discovered face carved on the base of the pyramid could belong to one of the original rulers, but nobody has a clue what his name was or when he reigned. The lost Trypillia. The mysterious story of Trypillia goes back about 7,000 years. In Moldova, Romania, and Ukraine, Thousands of years before they would get these names, early human beings built a civilization. Archaeologists have found traces here of the earliest known urbanization in Europe, showing a population of 1 million people. According to Mikhailo Videyko, a local archaeologist in Ukraine, the Trypillia civilization implemented advanced technological skills, highly sophisticated construction techniques, and they were part of a culture that worshipped goddesses. In the days of the Soviet Union, archaeological projects were massively funded. Communist officials believed the lost civilization of Trypillia was without class. Because this aligned perfectly with their Marxist ideology, their belief in a classless society without private ownership, the Soviets were eager to dig up more information about Trypillia. But then things changed. Archaeologists continued to discover more and more megalithic sites, places with huge buildings, organized city streets, luxurious clothing, and jewelry. Archaeologists began to say that Trypillia wasn't a classless society after all. When that happened, the Soviets shut down funding for additional archaeological research into the culture. These days, Trypillia is still a mystery. Scientists don't believe an ancient society where everyone was equal could possibly have built such megalithic cities by themselves. It seems unfeasible that a population of over 1 million people could have existed without there being different classes and private ownership. But since we don't know for sure, the truth of Trypillia is still unknown. The Lost World in the Clouds. Deep in the rainforests of Venezuela, there are a series of islands in the sky. These islands are really mountaintops, but they don't look anything like the snowy mountain peaks of the Rocky Mountains or the Himalayas. These mountaintops are flat, like tabletops. They rise 9,000 feet above sea level and are so high above the clouds they look like floating islands. The biggest and most famous is called Mount Roraima, and some believe it's a lost world where dinosaurs have yet to fully go extinct. The tops of these mountains are so isolated from the rest of the world that the flora and fauna are totally unique. The geography is so remote that scientists have already identified thousands of plant species which exist nowhere else in the world. It's no surprise that these mystical mountains have fascinated explorers, writers, and scientists for centuries. The mountain plateaus have been around for about 400 million years. They formed at a time when South America was still connected to Africa. What this means is that dinosaurs most certainly walked across the surface here. And for this reason, legend has it that while the dinosaurs went extinct everywhere else, a small group remained stubbornly alive above the clouds in Venezuela. No dinosaurs have been found alive just yet, but scientists have never been able to fully disprove the existence of prehistoric monsters on Mount Roraima. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. St. Peter's birthplace. A recently discovered inscription at the site of an ancient church has offered new evidence for the location of St. Peter's birthplace. St. Peter was one of the most important of Jesus Christ's 12 apostles. He was supposedly a fisherman who went with Jesus for 3 years while he preached his ministry, then went on to become the very first pope of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, archaeologists working in Israel say they've uncovered a new artifact in the village of Bethsaida. This artifact shows where the religious leader and his brother, the Apostle Andrew, were born. The archaeologists were excavating a church basilica at El Araj when they found an inscription in Greek referencing the chief and commander of the heavenly apostles. This phrase was used in old religious texts to describe St. Peter. Clearly, Peter had some kind of association with this church. Archaeologists believe it may have been built over the foundation of the very house in which Peter and Andrew were born. The mighty Cyclops. The Cyclops is a terrifying creature from Greek mythology. It's described in the old tales as a gigantic monster from a race of giants that only had one eye. And while it's easy to chalk up the existence of the Cyclops as fantasy, experts say the myth is probably rooted in reality. Unfortunately, there is no indisputable evidence that any Cyclops existed, but they were discussed repeatedly in ancient literature. Homer mentioned a Cyclops named Polyphemus in the Odyssey, and the Greek author Sallamachus wrote that it was a group of Cyclops that built the fortifications of Mycenae. In 275 BC, the poet Theocritus wrote 2 poems talking about very real and living cyclops. But just where do all of these stories come from? Researchers believe the origins of the cyclops can be found in the skulls of elephants. Paleontologist Othenio Abel says that when ancient people found the prehistoric skulls of dwarf elephants, beasts that once roamed across Europe, they mistook them for the skulls of huge one-eyed people. Because the nasal cavity of the dwarf elephant's skull makes it look as though the creature only had one eye, it's easy to see where the myth came from. Even if there never was a real human cyclops, the mythical being still originated from real physical skulls. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. The Meadowcroft Rock Shelter is one of the most amazingly mysterious places in Pennsylvania. The rock shelter was discovered in 1973 by a man named Albert Miller, then excavated by archaeologists at the University of Pittsburgh. They discovered what to this day is some of the oldest evidence of human beings in North America. The evidence they found in the cave dates back 19,000 years. Although the shelter is called a cave, it's really more of a rock overhang. It would have been used as a primitive shelter from the elements by prehistoric human beings. Primitive tools have been found here, along with the remains of fire pits from the Ice Age and evidence that changes the history books. The real mystery of the cave is that it dates back so far. Most archaeologists have dated the arrival of humans in the Americas at around 13,000 years ago. This is the current commonly accepted belief. However, the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter disproves the dating irrefutably. Humans arrived in America at least 19,000 years ago, probably earlier. While the cave is in Pennsylvania, the original humans would have come from as far north as Alaska. It probably would have taken them at least 1,000 years just to migrate so far east. The Helm of Awe. The most mysterious and powerful of all the Old Norse mythological symbols is the Helm of Awe. The symbol is composed of 8 arms that look like tridents sticking out from a central point. The symbol is symmetrical, relatively simple, and yet is filled with supposed magic. The purpose of the magical symbol was to exude overwhelming might. In the Norse fable Fafnir's Maul, the dragon Fafnir claims to gain his invincibility by using the Helm of Awe. And in a collection of spells and folklore published in the 19th century by John Arneson, there are directions on how to properly use the symbol. The Helm of Awe is to be drawn between the eyebrows, and then the person is to utter a spell to grant them a burst of inhuman power. There are even spells in the legendary Icelandic grimoire, the Galdrbok, which use the Helm of Awe. The Vikings and their descendants were firm believers in magic and otherworldly power. Runologist Stephen Flowers says that the Helm of Awe probably began as a way to strike fear into the enemy. It's possible Vikings drew this symbol on their foreheads, believing they would be endowed with the fury of berserkers on their way into combat. When their enemies saw them coming with the terrifying symbol on their forehead, it was like psychological warfare. Nefertiti's tomb. The tomb of Queen Nefertiti has never been found, but there is a rumor that behind a secret door inside King Tut's tomb, her mummified remains are waiting to be revealed. Nefertiti was queen of Egypt in the 18th dynasty. She was the wife of the despised pharaoh Akhenaten, probably King Tut's stepmother, and nobody is really sure of the extent of her power. Some believe she ruled alongside Akhenaten as a loathed queen, utterly hated by the people. Others believe she may have been the only thing that kept Akhenaten from being ripped apart by his own people. It's believed she died around the year 1340 BC, but experts aren't sure when. We know that 5 years before Akhenaten's reign ended, she vanished from the history books. Nefertiti may have died just before him, or she may have lived long enough to rule alongside her stepchild, King Tut. Whatever the case, Nefertiti has remained a powerful historical figure for 3,000 years. She's renowned even today for her great beauty, and yet nobody knows where she's buried. One of the theories, according to British archaeologist Nicholas Reeves, is that King Tut's tomb was originally Nefertiti's tomb. She was buried inside it, but then she was replaced by King Tut because nobody wanted to build another tomb for the young boy. Nefertiti was then sealed behind a mysterious wall inside the tomb, a wall which has never been broken down, to see what's on the other side. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time for more historical mysteries. Bye!